Finally got promoted to manager. After 10 years at the same company, but my best friend who worked there too, framed me for embezzlement. When I didn't give him a raise and I found out he'd been stealing from the company for years. I was 30 when it finally arrived, the promotion that I had been seeking for almost 10 years. 10 years of getting in early, leaving late, taking the blame for other people's mistakes, as if I hadn't heard the whispers that I'd never make it to the top because I wasn't management material. I'd learned to swallow lots of pride in those 10 years. The work, a small trucking firm in Ohio by the name of Redline Freight, was not glitzy, but it paid the rent. And after a decade, I thought I had finally found my niche. The irony is, when I was promoted to operations manager, I felt relief rather than elation. I remember standing in that conference room, shaking hands with our regional director, Mr. Tolland, not paying attention to the slower clap of Evan, my so-called best friend. Evan and I joined at the same time. He was 24, I was 20. We met in training, drank beers after work, and inexplicably became invincible. He was clever, funny, the kind of man who could get anyone giggling in 2 minutes. Everybody liked him, but he also had the talent for taking shortcuts. I used to tease him with the statement that he could get a check just by showing up with a smile. With the passing of time, that smile got him out of trouble more often than I could count. We'd both been waiting around for that management job, and when that came up, I was the one who got it. He wasn't. That's when things started to change. At first, I didn't even notice it. He congratulated me, embraced me, said, "About damn time, man," and for a while, everything was fine. But then he started making subtle requests for a raise, not direct, but little comments. "Guess I'll be seeing that bump soon, right?" Or, "You can stand up for me now, boss." I teased. I wasn't his boss, not technically, but he worked for my department now, and corporate policy was definite on changes in pay. Raises came from HR, not me. When I told him that, he gave a wink. "Come on, Mason. We've been through hell together. You're telling me you can't push it through by bulldozing?" It was the first time I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Resentment. I dismissed it as one of those things that would pass. It didn't. 2 weeks later, strange things started to happen. Lost bills, past due shipment notices, and then one morning I showed up at the office to find Ms. Carter from accounting hovering over my desk, holding a folder like a club. She told me there were irregularities in the expense reports. Apparently, a number of transactions under my approval code had been flagged for repeated payments. I felt my stomach drop down the drain. I went over the files myself, line by line. Someone had made use of my digital signature MC on transactions I never initiated. Over $10,000 had been routed out of company money into a third-party account. I am sitting there with the monitor in front of me, clammy hands, thinking, this is a mistake. I hadn't even opened those documents. I hadn't logged those dates. I called up IT, tried to look at logins. Sure enough, the login was from my employee ID. My login credentials had been hijacked by someone. The next day, I was summoned to HR. 2 hours in that dingy conference room with them interrogating me like a suspect. Did you sanction any vendor transfers? Do you recognize an organization called Allied Systems? Have you shared your password with anyone recently? I said everything I knew, but I could feel the mood shifting. When they suspect you, truth doesn't matter anymore. Perception does. That night, I called Evan. He did not answer, which was not like him because most times he'd answer within seconds. I drove by his apartment, the one off Elm Street, and his car wasn't there. I did not sleep that night. I kept replaying it in my head. Who had access to my system? Who could have done this? Only a handful of people, and one of them was Evan. I didn't want to think it. We'd spent years taking turns working the swing shift, grabbing lunch in the break room, making jokes about how broke we were. I felt like we were brothers. The next day, HR put me on hold, pending investigation. They said it wasn't a layoff, just procedure. I got it. They didn't believe me. I cleared my desk quietly as people went out of their way not to notice. That's the beauty of workplaces. They're nice until they catch a scent of blood. 3 days later, Mr. Tolland phoned me himself. His voice was cold, like he'd already reached a conclusion. Mason, we've completed the initial audit. The transfers can be traced back to your ID and the vendor account was opened in your home address. I tensed. My address? I had no idea how this was even possible. He continued, "We're notifying law enforcement, but before we proceed any further, I wanted to capture your comment." My throat tightened. All I managed to say was, "I didn't do it." Even I could tell how pathetic it sounded. He exhaled a deep breath and spoke, "I hope so, Mason. For your own sake." When the call was over, I just sat there staring at the reflection in the dark laptop screen. My hands were shaking. My address, my ID, my name. It felt like someone had pulled my entire life into the courtroom. That night, I spoke with Evan for the first time. He texted, "Heard what happened, man. That's harsh. You all right?" I stared at the screen. That casual tone. No surprise, no shock, just space. I sent him a reply of, "Did you have anything to do with this?" He sent me a laughing emoji and said, "What? No, bro. Don't begin losing it." That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. Because something about it rang false. Cold. And I remembered something from a number of months ago, a typical afternoon when Evan had borrowed my laptop to look over a spreadsheet. He'd been at my desk for maybe 10 minutes when I was out of the office in a meeting. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now I couldn't help but think about it. I had a visit from Detective Hanley the next day. Plainclothes, gentle voice, asked me if I'd come down to the police station and help them with a few questions. I did. I told them everything. They listened politely but said very little at all. When they left me alone in that tiny interview room, my brain just broke down. All my memories of Evan, laughter and secrets and weekend afternoons spent fixing his beat-up truck, started to ring false, as if I'd lived with a stranger all these years and had never known it. I went back home, closed the door, and sat in silence. My whole life was coming apart, and I didn't have anyone I could go to. My parents were 3 states away. I didn't want to scare them. My sister would have believed me, but she was at home with a new baby. I just sat there in the dark, feeling stupid, small, and betrayed. I didn't venture out of my apartment for 2 days afterwards. I just sat there, surrounded by half-full boxes from when I'd imagined that I'd be moving into a better living space after the promotion. How life turns around. One minute you're at the precipice of something good, the next you're fighting to persuade everyone that you didn't wreck it all. On the 3rd day, I got out of bed. I went out just to clear my head. It was cold, the kind of brisk air that awakens you whether you want it to or not. I walked past the old coffee house where Evan and I sat after our shift, fantasizing about how we'd both end up owning the firm someday. The memory burned. He'd been stealing from the firm for years, and I'd been too stupid to realize it. I didn't know it for sure yet, but I knew it in my gut. You can tell that queasy sense of something clicking in your stomach before your head can accept it. That was what happened. 7 days after that, I got a blocked call. It was Detective Hanley again. He told me they'd traced the account where the money had been diverted. It was listed under an assumed business name, but the IP addresses traced back to a building where Evan's girlfriend, Chloe, had her e-boutique. My heart tightened. Chloe was always nice, but standoffish. She had been with Evan for 3 years, and she took care of his personal finances since he was, as he described it, too lazy for that sort of thing. I remember walking by and seeing her printing documents in our office late one night. Evan explained to me that she was helping him with tax returns. I had believed him, foolishly. Hanley asked me if I remembered whether anyone might have gained access to my computer or files. I told him about the time Evan borrowed my laptop. He paused, wrote some notes down, and said, "We'll investigate." That night, I went to Evan's residence. I hadn't planned anything. I just wanted to look at his face. His truck was in the driveway, interior light on. He got out, looking surprised but not upset. That just infuriated me further. "We need to talk," I told him. He shrugged. "About what?" I went inside before he could say anything to prevent me. "You know damn well what. You framed me." He laughed, like I'd been funny. "You've lost it, man. You really think I'd do that?" His voice was calm. Too calm. I looked around the room and noticed something off. New furniture, expensive stuff. Evan never did have the money for that. "Where'd all this come from?" I asked sternly. He smiled. Guess hard work pays off at last. My teeth grated. You've never worked a single day hard in your life. He didn't even flinch. Maybe you're just jealous, Mason. You won your title, but I won the money. Hearing him say so sealed it all. I wanted to attack him, but I did not. I only said, "They'll catch you, Evan. Men like you always get caught." He inched closer, whispered, "Maybe. But by that time, you will already be ruined." I left before I did something stupid. I phoned Detective Hanley when I got home and told him everything Evan had told me. He told me to keep calm, they were close to getting evidence. But keeping calm was not an option. My name was still blocked in HR's database. Bills were mounting, and I couldn't sleep because I knew Evan was out laughing it off. Hanley phoned again a few days later. They'd subpoenaed bank statements and found frequent deposits into Chloe's boutique account from the same supplier who paid the pilfered invoices. It was the break I'd been praying for. But Hanley explained to them that they needed one more connection, a direct connection between Evan's devices and the transfers. That's when I remembered something. I had kept the flash drive he gave me months ago with training videos he said were for the new employees stored in my desk drawer. I plugged it into the computer and noticed an encrypted folder I hadn't seen previously. I had no idea what the password was, but I took a screenshot and sent it to Hanley. He told me not to move anything and had someone come pick it up. 2 days went by, and he called me and talked in a hushed tone. "You might want to sit down." They'd busted the folder. It contained spreadsheets of fake vendor payments, account numbers, and emails between Evan and Chloe to arrange the transfers. My name was used in dozens of occasions, used as a shield. They'd been stealing my login credentials for months, if not longer. Both of them were taken into custody that night by the detectives. You would think that's when I would be vindicated, but I wasn't. When the firm called me to tell me I was in the clear, all I felt was nothing. 10 years of hard work, and they'd let me go the moment things were getting hot. I went back to the office to trade some things, and others avoided my eyes as though I was infected still. Despite having my name cleared, rumors didn't end. That's the way offices are. Now that you're labeled forever. HR rehired me with my position back, but the thought of going back into that building made me sick. So, I quit. The following weeks were a blur. Evan bailed, Chloe disappeared. I was in therapy because I just couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was living my life. My therapist, Dr. Lynette, told me that betrayal reprograms the brain. She explained that it's not when you lose trust that you're wrecked. It's when you see someone find out about your goodness so they could use it to wreck you. That resonated with me. I recalled all the times Evan would teasingly say, "Get ahead any way you can." I'd chuckle, never thinking anything of it. Well, that was the playbook. A month later, Hanley called again. The case was proceeding. They had enough to indict Evan on wire fraud and identity theft. He'd be facing years in prison. But Hanley said something that stuck with me. He said to me, "He didn't want money, Mason. Undefined, he wanted to see you fail." That's what I remembered. Notify Data CT changed, because it meant Evan's betrayal wasn't greed-red, it was personal. He had watched me work for years, waiting for me to move up so he could sabotage it. That night, I sat in my car outside the Red Line building, just sitting, empty. The windows were lit up, the parking lot where I used to pull in every morning. I had a moment when I knew that I'd invested a decade of my life in a town that would never forget me, and in a friend that never even cared about me. I didn't feel angry for the first time. Maybe I just felt done. Ever since Evan's arrest, the world had been too quiet. I moved from my former apartment because every corner and crevice reminded me of that friendship. I had a new, smaller apartment on the outskirts of town, close to a lake where no one recognized me. I started spending mornings perched at the edge of the water, just trying to breathe. 10 years of pressure, suspicion, and betrayal had drained me. It's strange the way quiet after storm has more weight. I tried to seek new employment, but no interview was ever varied. The manager would smile, ask about my exit from Redline Freight, and then subtly look at his notes. No one wishes to hire a guy whose name is on a cop report, even when it was a case of miscommunication. I left after my 5th rejection. I recall a time when my phone rang during one afternoon. It was Ms. Carter from accounting, the same individual who'd originally brought the forged invoices to my attention. She sounded anxious, mentioned she wanted to meet up for coffee. I nearly declined, but curiosity got the better of me. We met at a small cafe downtown. She appeared uncomfortable, as though she didn't want to be seen with me. "Mason," She spoke softly. "I needed to tell you something. You were correct on all of it. Evan confessed. She told me that the detective showed him the files on the flash drive, and he fainted. He admitted to having fixed me up, said he did it because he couldn't stand seeing me get a promotion while he was stuck. When she said that, I looked at her. I wasn't justified. I was simply worn out. I asked her if the company told me anything, and she nodded. They feel awful, but you know how it is. They left. That hit me harder than I expected. Dozens of years of my life, and already replaced. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Evan, stamped on the county jail. The writing was sloppy, frantic. It started with, "I'm sorry, man." I almost tore it up in two, but I read it. He explained how he'd started stealing years ago when his bills had piled up, how he'd rationalized that he'd fix it before getting caught. He pointed out it got away from him, and when I got promoted, he freaked. He blamed his failure on me. He pointed out framing me wasn't about the money, it was about making things fair. I sat there staring at that word, fair. There was nothing even about any of it. He ruined my reputation, my career, my peace, and then wanted to break it off. I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and never opened it again. I got a part-time job working at a hardware store just to keep my mind busy. The pay was barely enough, but the routine was good. The proprietor, Mr. Whitman, was a gentle-voiced old man who didn't ask questions. He said to me, "You look like you've been through hell. People who make it through that work hard." That was something that stuck with me. He didn't want to know what I'd done prior, just how hard I worked. Slowly, I began to feel like a human being again. There was something genuine about restocking the shelves, fixing things, helping people find the correct screws. Simple work. No politics, no betrayals, just work that ceased when the day did. I was unloading one afternoon when I saw a news flash appear on my phone. Local man sentenced to 5 years for corporate embezzlement. Evan's face showed up right there. His confession was referred to in the story, the secret accounts, and how he attributed stress and addiction to what he had done. I stared at his photograph for hours. He was older, exhausted, as if the weight of his deception finally caught up with him. I should have been content, but I only felt regret. Not for him, however, but for the friendship we lost to greed. That evening, I didn't sleep again. I drove out to the lake, pulled by the water, and just sat in the car and listened to the quiet. I thought back over everything that had transpired, the trust, the betrayal, the humiliation, the gradual return to a sort of peace. And I wondered aloud if I would ever be the same person anymore. Because when someone betrays you like that, you view things differently. You view people differently. You view yourself differently. The next morning, my sister phoned. Rachel, who is 32, resides in Colorado with her husband and 2 children. She had been attempting to get me to come visit for months. I told her again and again that I was okay, but she never took me seriously. "Mason, come stay for a while," she told me. "You need some time off." I wanted to refuse, but when I tried to speak, my voice cracked. She got me a flight before I could even object. 2 days after that, I was on a flight, and the clouds melted away under me. It was like leaving the debris behind, even temporarily. Her children came running up to me, screaming, "Uncle Maze," and I hadn't experienced such warmth in years. We grilled hamburgers one evening, hung out by their fire pit, and for the first time in months, I laughed. Truly laughed. Not the artificial kind you muster when you're attempting to pretend you're okay. Rachel shot me a look across the fire and said, "You're starting over. You just don't know it yet." Maybe she was right. A week later, helping my husband fix our garage door, I learned something heavy but plain. The people who've hurt you might never even know what they have done. The apology will never be enough. But you have to go on anyway. You have to keep moving, even when forgiveness is not possible. It doesn't mean you forget. It means you stop allowing the pain to guide your decisions. That insight remained with me the rest of the day. When I went to bed that night, I slept throughout the night for the first time since it all began. 6 months into Evan's sentence, life had settled into a state of being that was semblance of peace. Not perfect, not even close, but real. I remained in Colorado, still helping my sister's family with household tasks while I tried to map out what the future looked like. I woke up before dawn one morning and sat outside on the back porch to see the sun come up. The sky lightened from a pale blue to a gold, and I smiled. I was smiling for the first time in years without worrying about something going wrong. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes anymore, wasn't reading that letter from Evan repeatedly, wasn't reliving every mistake at Redline. I hadn't forgotten, but the cutting edges of those memories had softened. That's the effect of time. It doesn't mend you, but dulls the pain. Aaron, Rachel's husband, owned a small construction business, and one afternoon he asked me if I'd be willing to do some paperwork and scheduling for him. No glitter, but it reminded me I still had organizational abilities. A couple of months later, he invited me to work in a full-time role as operations lead. The irony was not lost on me. I had once been an operations manager, and that job nearly killed me. But this was different. Smaller staff, integrity-driven work, no corporate politics. Yes, I agreed. And finally, after a long time, I was not chasing a title or trying to make a name for myself. I simply needed stability. That day, while I was doing paperwork in Aaron's office, I found an old notebook of mine wedged in a drawer. The scribbles I'd written years earlier regarding how to streamline efficiency at Redline were within it. I flipped through the pages, scanning the plans I'd believed would succeed once. I smiled quietly. All that effort, all that commitment, and it ended in a police interrogation. I closed the notebook and realized something very important. Loyalty only matters if it's reciprocated. Otherwise, it's another way of getting hurt. Some 2 weeks had passed and I got another letter. This time, it wasn't from Evan. It was his mom, Mrs. Grant. I had not seen her for years, but she explained that Evan wanted to apologize in person before he could be sent to a state home. I didn't know what to do. Half of me wished to get rid of the letter, but the other half wanted closure, so I agreed. We sat in a small visitation room at the jail. When Evan arrived, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, his hair was cut very short, and his eyes were sunken. He sat and spoke in a low voice. "You didn't deserve any of it." I said nothing for a moment. I just looked at him. The man who was like a brother to me now seemed like a stranger. He told me that it started small, fake bills here and there, and escalated. He said that when I got promoted, something inside him broke. He said to me that he thought if I were to fall, people would know that he was not by himself. I wanted to know why he hadn't asked for help. He glanced at the ground and replied, "Because I didn't want you to see me fail." That pained me somewhat. Not because it explained what he had done, but because it reminded me of who we were. He asked if I could ever forgive him. I didn't know how to respond. Forgiveness is not a switch you can flip. It's a bumpy, uneasy climb out of anger. I said to him, "I don't hate you, Evan, but I can never trust you again." He nodded and whispered, "That's fair." Those were the last words we ever shared. When I stepped out of that jail, I didn't experience relief or vindication. I felt light, like I'd at last set something down that weighed too much to be carrying any longer. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel, and I knew this state of acceptance, this was the real end. Not the trial, not the firing, not the headlines. Simple, quiet peace. Months went by. Time with Aaron grew. I leased a small apartment outside of the mountains. I went back to hiking, something that had not been accomplished since college. The outdoors felt clean, like rinsing something from me. I didn't speak of what had occurred again, but now and then when the sun broke through the trees in a particular way, I found myself pining for that office in Ohio, Evan's laugh, for the version of myself who believed friendship couldn't turn sour. I sometimes missed him, the trusting fool, but I knew he needed to leave so I could remain alive. I heard from Ms. Carter one evening. She had left Redline and was employed by a non-profit that helped people coming back to work after criminal charges or unfair firing. She said she was inspired by what you did, wanted to do something good with it. Reading that, I felt maybe some good did come out of all the nastiness. Maybe the plan wasn't to get rid of the hurt, but to use it. I still think about Evan from time to time. Not with contempt, not even with sympathy, but as a reminder of how quickly trust can be broken, how envy waits in weak places, and how, unless you watch yourself, someone else's shadows will drag you down before you know it. But I also think of the others who were with me after all that. Rachel, Aaron, Dr. Lynette, even Ms. Carter. They showed me that not everyone betrays you. There are some who show up when your world is broken and help you rebuild one. brick by brick. So now when someone tries to ask what happened all those years ago, I don't tell them everything. I just tell them, I learned who I really was. Because that's true. Losing everything stripped me down to the pieces that count. And the man who emerged from it isn't perfect, but he is honest. He's wary of who he trusts. And he finally knows when to walk away.